Mortgage brokers know everyone's dirty laundry. We see the credit reports, the hidden debts, the desperate refinancing attempts to cover gambling losses or affairs. What I didn't expect was to find my own wife's secrets buried in designer bags and locked drawers. My name is Eric Mason, and I've been in the mortgage business for 15 years. Started from nothing, worked my way up from loan processor to senior broker at Pinnacle Financial. My wife Danielle works there too, different department, same building. We met at a company Christmas party 8 years ago, married 2 years later. Perfect setup, everyone said. Power couple in the making. That was before she got her important client. It started 3 months ago with lunch meetings that stretched past 3 o'clock. Dani would breeze back into the office with that glow women get when they're excited about something, her cheeks flushed, talking about this major commercial deal she was working. Real estate syndication, she said. Big money, complicated structure, lots of face time required. Eric, you wouldn't believe the opportunities this could open up for us, she'd say, practically bouncing on her toes. This client, he's connected to everything. Hotels, shopping centers, residential developments. If I handle this right, I could be looking at senior loan officer by Christmas. I was happy for her. Dani had always been ambitious, maybe more than me. She had the looks for client relations, blonde hair that caught light just right, green eyes that made people want to trust her, and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. She dressed the part too, always professional, but with just enough style to stand out. If anyone could land a whale client, it was her. The first gift appeared on a Tuesday. I came home from a site inspection to find Dani in the kitchen, humming while she cooked dinner. Nothing unusual there, except for the Hermes scarf draped over the back of her chair. Burnt orange silk with a pattern that probably cost more than my truck payment. Nice scarf, I said, loosening my tie. New? Oh, this? She touched it like she'd forgotten it was there. Client appreciation gift. You know how these big deals work. They like to show gratitude for the extra effort. I knew how big deals worked. In 15 years, the most expensive client gift I'd ever received was a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue. This scarf looked like it came from the Hermes store downtown, where they kept the good stuff behind glass cases. Must be some client, I said. Grant Lyle, Lyle Development Group. They're based out of Dallas, but expanding into our market. Really sophisticated operation. She said his name with a reverence usually reserved for celebrities or lottery winners. I made a mental note to look him up later. The gifts kept coming. A leather handbag that appeared and disappeared within days, perfume I'd never smelled before, something expensive and French that lingered in our bedroom, jewelry that showed up for dinner dates, then vanished into her jewelry box, which had suddenly acquired a lock. Dani, I said one evening, watching her slide a gold bracelet off her wrist, this client of yours is pretty generous. It's not what you think, she said quickly. These are samples. He's developing a luxury retail complex, wants my opinion on the kind of amenities that would attract upscale tenants. I'm like a focus group. A focus group that gets to keep the samples? Temporarily. I have to return everything once the deal closes. But she didn't return them. I knew because I started paying attention. The scarf moved from the chair to her closet to a locked drawer in her dresser. The handbag went from the kitchen counter to the hall closet to the same locked drawer. The jewelry followed the same pattern, brief appearances, then disappearance into her private collection. I called it gift archaeology, this process of tracking expensive items through their life cycle in our house. Tags removed immediately, receipts nowhere to be found, stories that got vaguer each time I asked about them. The lunch meetings stretched longer. 2 hours became 3, then 4. Dani would return to the office flushed and energetic, talking about contract negotiations and site visits, but never with any paperwork to show for it. No files, no documents, no business cards. Just stories about restaurants I'd never heard of and meetings that never seemed to produce actual progress. How's the Lyle deal coming? I'd ask over dinner. Oh, you know how these things go. Lots of back and forth. He's very particular about the terms. Wants to make sure everything is perfect before we move forward. When do you think you'll close? Soon. These big deals, they take time, but when it happens, it's going to be huge for both of us. Both of us. That phrase started showing up a lot in her descriptions of the deal. Not huge for the company or huge for my career, but huge for both of us. Like she and Grant Lyle were partners in something more than a business transaction. The final red flag came on a Thursday evening in late September. Dani was in the shower when her phone rang on the nightstand. She'd been glued to that thing for weeks, taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. But tonight she'd forgotten it. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Heavy breathing, then a male voice, smooth and confident. Hey, beautiful. You left so fast today I didn't get to tell you how incredible you looked in that dress. The blue one that matches your eyes. I've been thinking about taking it off you all afternoon." I hung up without saying a word. When Dani came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel with her hair dripping, I held up her phone. "Someone called for you. Didn't leave a name." She grabbed the phone like it was on fire, checking the missed call log. Her face went pale, then red, then back to pale. "Probably a wrong number," she said. "I get those sometimes." But her hands were shaking as she set the phone face down on the dresser. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Dani slept beside me, her breathing deep and regular. The voice on the phone had been intimate, familiar, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who knew exactly what color eyes she had and what she looked like in a blue dress. Grant Lyle, I was willing to bet, her important client. I'd been married long enough to know the signs, but I'd been choosing to ignore them. The late meetings, the expensive gifts, the secretive phone calls, the way she said his name like it meant something special. My wife wasn't just working a big deal, she was having an affair. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Being a mortgage broker teaches you to follow paper trails. Money leaves tracks and people lie, but bank statements don't. If Dani was playing games with Grant Lyle, the evidence would be in the numbers. I started with our joint accounts. Dani's corporate credit card showed restaurant charges 3 times what she claimed for business meals. Chez Laurent on Elm Street, $240 on a Tuesday afternoon. Le Bernardin downtown, $315 on a Thursday. These weren't business lunches, these were dates. The pattern was consistent. Every week, sometimes twice a week, charges at restaurants I'd never been to, amounts that suggested multiple courses, expensive wine, the kind of leisurely dining you do when you're trying to impress someone, or when someone's trying to impress you. I cross-referenced the dates with Dani's calendar. Every restaurant charge corresponded to a client meeting with Lyle Development Group. But the amounts were wrong. If this was legitimate business, the client should have been paying. Instead, Dani was picking up tabs that cost more than our mortgage payment. Unless someone was reimbursing her under the table. I dug deeper into Grant Lyle's background. Lyle Development Group was real enough, a Dallas-based company specializing in commercial real estate syndication. Grant himself was 45, divorced twice, with a reputation in the industry that wasn't entirely professional. I found 3 different news articles mentioning him in connection with affairs with junior partners at firms he'd worked with. One divorce filing specifically cited adultery with a loan officer at a Houston bank. The man had a type, and my wife fit the profile perfectly. But there was something else. Lyle Development Group's recent projects showed a pattern of complex financing structures involving multiple LLCs, offshore entities, and mortgage arrangements that seemed designed more for obfuscation than efficiency. The kind of structures that made sense if you were trying to hide money movement or create artificial paper trails. I pulled the property records for his recent acquisitions. Shell companies within shell companies, all tracing back to a web of entities that existed mainly on paper, and there, buried in the mortgage documentation for a strip mall in Plano, was a familiar signature. Danielle Mason, Notary Public, State of Texas. My wife had notarized documents for Grant Lyle's deals, documents that, according to the filing dates, she'd signed off on before she'd ever mentioned him as a client. Their business relationship went back at least 6 months, not the 3 months she'd told me. She'd been lying from the beginning. I made copies of everything and locked them in my office, safe. Then I did something that probably violated a dozen privacy laws. I cloned Dani's laptop while she was at work. The deleted files told the real story. Chat logs between Dani and Grant going back 8 months. The early messages were professional enough. Discussions about loan terms, property valuations, market conditions. But by the 3rd month, the tone had shifted. Grant. Dinner was incredible last night. You're incredible. Dani. I keep thinking about what you said. About opportunities. Grant. Smart women see opportunities everywhere, especially smart, beautiful women. Dani. The Riverside Project. Are you sure the numbers work? Grant. Trust me. I've done this before. The key is controlling the appraisal process. That exchange was from 5 months ago, 3 months before Dani had mentioned Grant as a client. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning something together, something involving appraisal manipulation, which in the mortgage business meant fraud. I kept reading. The messages got more explicit, both romantically and criminally. Grant was walking Dani through a scheme involving inflated property appraisals, falsified loan applications, and kickbacks routed through consulting fees and gift purchases. The expensive presents weren't tokens of affection, they were money laundering. The blue dress Grant had mentioned on the phone, purchased with a corporate credit card as a client relations expense, then given to Dani as part of a systematic process of converting business funds into personal benefits. The Hermes scarf, the jewelry, the handbags, all of it was fraud, disguised as romance. My wife wasn't just cheating on me, she was stealing. The final piece of evidence was a folder labeled Insurance Documentation. Grant's scheme involved more than just mortgage fraud. He was planning to default on the loans intentionally, claim business losses for tax purposes, then collect insurance payouts on properties that had been deliberately overvalued. Dani's job was to facilitate the mortgage approvals, then disappear the paperwork that would expose the fraud. In exchange, she'd get a cut of the insurance money and a new life with Grant in the Cayman Islands, where his shell companies were based. They were planning to run away together. I sat in my office at 2 a.m, staring at printed copies of my wife's betrayal, trying to decide what to feel. Anger seemed appropriate, but I was surprised to find that what I felt most was professional offense. I'd spent 15 years building a reputation in the mortgage industry. I'd never cut corners, never falsified documents, never participated in the kind of schemes that had crashed the housing market in 2008, and my wife was planning to destroy all of that for a man she'd known less than a year. The smart thing would have been to call the FBI immediately. Mortgage fraud was a federal crime, and I had enough evidence to put both of them away for a decade. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the desire to handle this myself. But I wanted to see how far they'd go before I pulled the plug. I wanted to watch them dig their own graves. The next morning, I acted like nothing had changed, made coffee, kissed Dani goodbye, went to work like any other day. But I was watching everything now, cataloging every lie, every secret meeting, every expensive gift that appeared and disappeared. "How's the Lyle deal progressing?" I asked over dinner that night. "Really well," Dani said, not meeting my eyes. "We're getting close to finalizing the terms. Grant thinks we might be ready to close by the end of the month." "That's great news. I'd love to meet him sometime. Maybe we could have him over for dinner?" The fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Oh, he's very busy, travels a lot. I don't think he does much socializing outside of business." "Of course, professional boundaries and all that." "Exactly." But her hands were shaking again, just like the night of the phone call. I was going to destroy them both. But first, I was going to let them think they were winning. Paul Henderson had been my best friend since college and a Dallas police detective for 12 years before taking early retirement. He ran a small private investigation firm now, mostly insurance fraud and cheating spouses. When I called him about Dani, he didn't seem surprised. "Mortgage fraud's getting more sophisticated," he said, reviewing the documents I'd copied. "Used to be simple stuff. Fake income statements, inflated appraisals. Now they're running full-scale operations with multiple shell companies and offshore accounts. Your wife and her boyfriend are playing in the major leagues." We were sitting in his office on a Saturday morning, Dani having left early for what she called a weekend site inspection with Grant. Paul's office looked like what you'd expect from an ex-cop. Metal desk, filing cabinets, coffee that could strip paint, and surveillance equipment that belonged in a spy movie. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" Paul asked. "I can call my contacts at the FBI right now. They love mortgage fraud cases, easy to prosecute, lots of media attention. Your wife and lover boy would be in handcuffs by Monday." "I want to watch them first," I said. "See how deep this goes, how many people are involved. If I'm going to destroy my marriage, I want to make sure I do it right." Paul grinned. Spoken like a man who's been hurt. "All right, let's see what they're up to." He handed me a GPS tracker the size of a matchbook. "Stick this under her car. It'll tell us everywhere she goes, how long she stays, who she meets. We'll build a complete picture of their operation before we shut it down." Installing the tracker took 30 seconds. Dani's BMW was parked in our garage, and she never looked under the chassis. By Sunday evening, we had our first data. She'd driven to the Ritz-Carlton downtown, stayed for 4 hours, then gone to a furniture store in the design district. The furniture store was closed on weekends, but the GPS showed her car parked behind the building for 2 hours. "That's not furniture shopping," Paul said, studying the tracking data. "That's a safe house, or an office they don't want connected to their main business. Can we get inside?" "Not legally, but we can watch who comes and goes." Monday afternoon, I called in sick and met Paul in the parking lot across from the furniture store. Through binoculars, we watched Dani arrive at 2 o'clock, followed 20 minutes later by Grant Lyle in a black Range Rover. Grant looked exactly like I'd expected. Tall, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of confident bearing that came from never having to worry about money. He moved like he owned everything he looked at, including my wife. They disappeared into the back of the building through a service entrance. Paul had positioned a parabolic microphone, but the distance was too great to pick up conversation. All we could do was wait and watch. They emerged 3 hours later, Grant carrying a briefcase, Dani carrying what looked like shopping bags from high-end stores. They kissed in the parking lot. Not a business kiss, but the kind of kiss that made my stomach clench with rage and humiliation. "You getting this?" I asked Paul. "Every second. High-definition video, time-stamped, GPS coordinates logged. This is going to look great in divorce court." But I wasn't thinking about divorce court anymore. I was thinking about revenge. That evening, Dani came home with another new handbag and a story about spending the afternoon reviewing loan documents. She was getting careless, or maybe she just didn't think I was smart enough to catch her. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she'd asked every day for 6 years. "Productive," I said. "Closed the Henderson refinance, started processing the Morrison commercial loan. Same old stuff. How about you? Get those loan documents reviewed?" "Oh yes, very thorough review. Grant's very particular about details." "I bet he is." She didn't catch the edge in my voice, or if she did, she ignored it. She was humming again, the same tune she'd been humming for weeks. I recognized it now. It was the song that had been playing in the background during one of their recorded phone conversations. After dinner, I excused myself to check email and called Paul. "I need you to dig deeper into Grant's financial situation," I said. "Bank accounts, property holdings, business relationships, everything." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if they're planning to disappear with stolen money, they've got to be moving assets around. And if they're moving assets around, there might be a way to intercept them." "Eric, be careful. These people are playing for serious money. If they think you're a threat, they don't think I'm anything. I'm just the boring husband who works too much and doesn't pay attention. That's going to be their mistake." Paul was quiet for a moment. "All right, but we do this smart. No cowboy stuff. We gather evidence, we build a case, and we let the law handle it." "Of course," I said, but I was already thinking about other options. The next morning, I started my own investigation into Grant's business empire. Property records, corporate filings, court documents, everything was public information if you knew where to look. What I found was a pattern of business relationships that ended badly. Partners who'd been forced out, investors who'd lost money, ex-wives who'd been left with nothing. Grant Lyle was a predator, and Dani was just his latest victim, except she didn't see herself as a victim. She saw herself as a partner. That was going to change. I spent the rest of the week playing the perfect, oblivious husband while building my case. I documented every lie, every secret meeting, every expensive gift. I traced the money flow through Grant's shell companies and identified the properties involved in their fraud scheme. I even found the insurance policies they were planning to claim against. By Friday, I had enough evidence to destroy them both, but I wasn't ready to use it yet. I wanted to see them make their final move first. I wanted to watch them think they'd won, right up until the moment I took everything away from them. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Friday afternoon, Dani announced she was going out of town for the weekend. "Client emergency," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Grant needs me to review some documents in Dallas. Last-minute thing." "On a weekend?" "You know how these big deals work. When the client needs something, you drop everything." I knew exactly how this deal worked, and it had nothing to do with document review. "I'll miss you," I said, kissing her goodbye. "Drive safe." "I will. Don't wait up. I might be late getting back Sunday." She was packed and gone within an hour, the BMW loaded with enough luggage for a week. Through the GPS tracker, I watched her drive straight to the Ritz-Carlton downtown, where Grant's Range Rover was already waiting. That evening, I made a phone call I'd been putting off for 2 weeks. "FBI Financial Crimes Division, Agent Sarah Mitchell speaking." "Agent Mitchell, my name is Eric Mason. I have information about an ongoing mortgage fraud operation involving interstate commerce and money laundering." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Can you be more specific, Mr. Mason?" "Multiple shell companies, falsified loan applications, inflated appraisals, and insurance fraud. I have documents, recordings, and financial records. The operation involves at least 2 states and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands." "How did you come by this information?" "My wife is one of the perpetrators." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Mason, I think we should meet in person. Are you available Monday morning?" "I'll be there." I spent the weekend organizing evidence. Bank records, property documents, chat logs, photos, GPS tracking data, recorded phone calls. Everything laid out in chronological order like a prosecutor's case file. By Sunday evening, I had 3 binders full of documentation that would put Dani and Grant away for a decade. But I wasn't done yet. Monday morning, I met Agent Mitchell at the FBI field office downtown. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made me glad she was on my side. "This is impressive work, Mr. Mason," she said, reviewing my documentation. "How long have you been aware of your wife's activities?" 3 weeks since I confirmed it. Suspicious for about 3 months before that. "And you haven't confronted her?" "I wanted to see how deep it went, and I wanted to make sure you had enough evidence for a conviction." Agent Mitchell smiled. "We appreciate thorough citizens. Based on what you've shown me, we can open a formal investigation immediately. We'll need you to continue monitoring their activities while we prepare search warrants and surveillance authorization." "How long will that take?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Can you maintain your current situation that long?" I thought about Dani coming home Sunday night, humming and glowing from her weekend with Grant, spinning lies about document review and client meetings. "I can do whatever you need." "Good. We'll want to coordinate the arrests with maximum impact, catch them in the act, if possible, with evidence in hand. Do you have any idea when they might be planning their next major move?" I pulled out the insurance documents I'd copied from Dani's laptop. According to their communications, they're planning to default on 3 major loans simultaneously next month, then file insurance claims within 48 hours. That's when they'll have the most liquid assets available for transfer. "Perfect. We'll be ready." Agent Mitchell handed me her card. "Mr. Mason, I have to ask, are you prepared for the consequences of this investigation? Your wife will likely face federal charges. Your marriage will be over. Your financial situation may be complicated for years." "Agent Mitchell, my marriage has been over since the day my wife decided to steal money with her boyfriend. I'm just making it official." "And the financial situation?" "I've been moving assets into protected accounts for 2 weeks. By the time you arrest her, everything worth protecting will be beyond her reach." "Smart man. We'll be in touch." I left the FBI office feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of secrets and surveillance was finally shifting to someone else's shoulders. But I wasn't ready to sit back and wait for federal justice. I had my own plans for Grant and Dani. That afternoon, I started phase 2 of my revenge, social destruction. The photo I'd taken of them holding hands at the restaurant was just the beginning. Over the past 3 weeks, Paul and I had documented dozens of meetings, hotel visits, and intimate moments. All perfectly legal surveillance, all admissible in court, and all devastating to their reputations. I started with Dani's professional network. The mortgage industry is small and gossipy, especially among loan officers and processors. A few carefully placed comments about unusual client relationships and suspicious documentation patterns, and the rumors would spread like wildfire. "I'm probably wrong," I told Jennifer Walsh, Dani's closest colleague. "But have you noticed anything odd about her Lyle development deal? The timeline seems off, and I haven't seen any of the usual paperwork." "Now that you mention it," Jennifer said, "she has been pretty secretive about that file. And those gifts she's been getting, client appreciation, seems excessive for a deal that hasn't closed yet. I'm sure it's nothing, just seemed unusual." But Jennifer was already thinking, already connecting dots. By the end of the week, half the office would be whispering about Dani's special relationship with her client. Next, I targeted Grant's business reputation. Real estate syndication depends on trust and credibility. Investors need to believe their money is safe, that deals are legitimate, that the syndicator isn't running side schemes. I created anonymous tips to industry publications, regulatory agencies, and investor forums. Nothing libelous, just questions about unusual corporate structures, complex financing arrangements, and patterns that might warrant closer examination. Has anyone done due diligence on Lyle Development Group's recent deals? The LLC structures seem designed for opacity rather than efficiency. Grant Lyle's divorce records mention adultery with business partners. Might be worth considering for fiduciary risk assessment. Cayman Islands Incorporation for domestic real estate deals? Seems like unnecessary complexity unless there's something to hide. Within days, Grant's phone was ringing with questions from investors, regulators, and business partners. The whisper campaign was working, but I saved the best for last. 3 weeks later, everything came together at once. Dani had been increasingly nervous, taking phone calls in private, working late, making excuses for weekend trips to Dallas. The GPS tracker showed a pattern of meetings at the furniture store, hotel visits, and trips to banks I'd never heard of. She and Grant were moving money, preparing for their final move. According to the chat logs I was still monitoring, they planned to close their biggest fraudulent deal on a Thursday afternoon, a $12 million commercial property loan based on an appraisal that was inflated by 40%. Once that money hit their accounts, they'd trigger the insurance claims on their other properties and disappear to the Cayman Islands within a week. They'd picked the wrong week. Agent Mitchell called Tuesday morning. "We're ready to move. Search warrants approved, arrest warrants signed, surveillance teams in position. We'll hit them at the closing on Thursday. Will you need me there? We'd prefer you stay away. This could get complicated, and we don't want you caught in the middle. But I had no intention of missing the finale. Thursday afternoon, I called in sick and positioned myself across the street from the title company where the closing was scheduled. Paul was with me, camera equipment ready, both of us watching the biggest show of our lives. Dani arrived first, looking nervous but excited. She'd dressed for the occasion, the blue dress Grant had mentioned in his phone call, the Hermes scarf, jewelry I'd watched her hide in locked drawers. She looked beautiful and confident, like a woman about to start a new life. Grant arrived 10 minutes later in the Range Rover, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of smile that suggested he thought he'd already won. They kissed in the parking lot, and I felt that familiar clench of rage and humiliation. "Last time they'll do that," Paul said, adjusting his camera lens. "Last time they'll do anything together." At exactly 3 o'clock, the FBI surveillance team moved into position. Unmarked cars at every exit, agents in business suits entering the building through the main entrance, technical teams setting up recording equipment. Agent Mitchell had timed it perfectly. The closing was scheduled for 3:30, which meant all the participants would be in the same room when the arrests happened. Dani, Grant, the title company representatives, the fake investors, the complicit appraiser, everyone who'd participated in the fraud, caught in the act of completing their biggest score. At 3:25, I watched federal agents walk into the title company building. At 3:32, they walked out with Dani and Grant in handcuffs. My wife looked smaller in handcuffs, diminished somehow. The confidence and excitement were gone, replaced by shock and fear. She kept looking around like she expected someone to tell her this was all a mistake, that the handcuffs would come off and she could go back to her new life with Grant. Grant looked angry, more than scared, his face red with indignation. He was saying something to the agents, probably demanding lawyers and threatening lawsuits. He still thought he could talk his way out of this. They were both wrong. Paul got it all on video. The perp walk, the media gathering, the federal agents loading evidence boxes into trucks. Dani's face when she saw the cameras, the moment she realized this wasn't going to be handled quietly. "How do you feel?" Paul asked. I watched my wife disappear into the back of a federal vehicle, her blue dress wrinkled, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. Like I can finally breathe again. But the show wasn't over yet. That evening, the arrests made the local news. Federal agents today arrested 2 people in connection with an alleged $12 million mortgage fraud scheme involving multiple properties and shell companies. Danielle Mason, a loan officer with Pinnacle Financial, and Grant Lyle, principal of Lyle Development Group, are charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. My phone started ringing immediately. Colleagues, friends, neighbors, all wanting to know if I'd had any idea what Dani was doing. I played the shocked husband perfectly, devastated by the betrayal, grateful to the FBI for stopping the crime, committed to cooperating fully with the investigation. "I can't believe she was living this double life," I told the reporter who showed up at my door. "The woman I married would never have done something like this. I don't know who she became, but it wasn't the person I thought I knew." It was all true, in a way. Friday morning brought more good news. Agent Mitchell called to update me on the investigation. "We've seized approximately $4 million in assets, frozen 18 bank accounts, and identified at least 6 other properties involved in the fraud scheme. Your wife and Mr. Lyle are looking at federal charges that could result in 15 to 20 years in prison." "What about plea bargains?" "Possible, if they cooperate. But based on the evidence you provided, we don't need their cooperation to get convictions. They're in a very weak negotiating position." "Good. There is one thing, Mr. Mason. Your wife's attorney has requested a meeting with you. She wants to discuss the possibility of reconciliation, claims this was all Mr. Lyle's idea, and she was manipulated into participating." I thought about the chat logs I'd read, the enthusiasm in Dani's messages about their plans, the way she'd talked about opportunities and new lives and getting what she deserved. "Tell her attorney I'm not interested in reconciliation. I'm interested in divorce proceedings and asset protection." "Understood. We'll continue to keep you informed as the case develops." After I hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the neighborhood where Dani and I had planned to build our life together. The house we'd bought with legitimate money from legitimate jobs, the future we'd talked about before she decided she wanted something more exciting. She'd thrown it all away for a man who saw her as a disposable tool in his fraud scheme. Grant Lyle had used her the same way he'd used his previous partners, as a means to an end, someone to take the fall when things went wrong. The irony was perfect. Dani had thought she was upgrading from a boring husband to an exciting lover. Instead, she'd traded a man who loved her for a man who was planning to abandon her the moment their scheme was exposed. But I wasn't done with my revenge yet. Federal prison was justice. What I had planned next was something more personal. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. With Dani facing federal charges, her attorney had little leverage to negotiate favorable terms. I'd moved our joint assets into protected accounts weeks before her arrest, legally and transparently, so there was nothing left for her to claim. The house, the cars, the retirement accounts, even her jewelry collection, everything went to me as the innocent spouse of a federal criminal. Texas law is very clear about protecting victims of spousal fraud, but the real satisfaction came from watching Dani's professional world collapse. The Texas Department of Banking suspended her loan officer license pending the outcome of her criminal case. The Mortgage Bankers Association revoked her professional certifications. Pinnacle Financial terminated her employment and banned her from the premises. More importantly, word spread through the tight-knit mortgage industry. Dani's name became synonymous with fraud and betrayal. Even if she somehow avoided prison, she'd never work in finance again. Grant's destruction was even more complete. His investors fled, his business partners severed ties, and his properties went into foreclosure as banks called in loans. The man who'd lived like a king for 20 years was suddenly facing bankruptcy and federal prison. But I wanted to see them face each other one more time, to watch their partnership crumble under the weight of mutual betrayal. The opportunity came during a pretrial hearing 6 weeks after their arrest. Both defendants were required to appear in federal court for a status conference, and I had every right to be there as a victim of their crimes. I arrived early and took a seat in the gallery where I could see everything. Dani came in first, flanked by her public defender. She couldn't afford private counsel anymore. She looked thin and pale, her hair pulled back severely, wearing a cheap suit that made her look older than her 38 years. Grant arrived separately, his expensive attorney arguing with prosecutors in the hallway. He'd aged dramatically in 6 weeks, his silver hair now more gray than silver, his confident bearing replaced by the hunched posture of a man under pressure. When they saw each other across the courtroom, I expected some sign of solidarity, some acknowledgement of their partnership in crime and love. Instead, I watched them destroy each other. Grant's attorney stood first. Your Honor, my client wishes to make the court aware that he has information relevant to the charges against Ms. Mason. Mr. Lyle was the victim of a sophisticated manipulation scheme. Ms. Mason used her position at the bank and her personal relationship with my client to gain access to confidential information and execute fraudulent transactions without his knowledge. Dani's face went white. Her attorney jumped up immediately. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Lyle was the architect of this entire scheme. Our client was manipulated by an experienced criminal who used their romantic relationship to coerce her participation. Ms. Mason is prepared to testify fully about Mr. Lyle's methods and the extent of his criminal enterprise. I watched my wife and her lover throw each other under the bus with the same enthusiasm they'd once brought to their affair. The partnership that had seemed so strong in their secret messages was dissolving into mutual accusation and betrayal. The judge looked disgusted. Counselors, save your arguments for trial. This court is not interested in your client's attempts to shift blame. But the damage was done. Grant and Dani stared at each other across the courtroom with hatred instead of love, each realizing that their partner was willing to sacrifice them to save themselves. After the hearing, I followed them into the hallway. Neither had seen me yet, and I wanted to hear what they'd say to each other. You bastard, Dani hissed at Grant. This was all your idea, the shell companies, the fake appraisals, the insurance fraud. I never would have thought of any of it. Your idea? Grant laughed bitterly. You came to me, remember? You're the one who said you were tired of being married to a boring mortgage broker. You wanted excitement, adventure, a chance to make real money. I trusted you. I gave up everything for you. You gave up nothing. You were looking for an excuse to leave your husband anyway. I just provided the opportunity. They were both right in their way. Grant had provided the criminal expertise, but Dani had provided the motivation. She'd wanted a different life, and she'd been willing to steal to get it. Now they were both facing the consequences. I stepped out of the shadows. Hello, Dani. She spun around, her face cycling through surprise, shame, and anger. Eric, what are you doing here? Watching justice happen. You remember Grant, don't you? Your important client? Grant looked at me with the kind of hatred usually reserved for personal enemies. You did this. You turned us in. I documented your crimes and reported them to the appropriate authorities. You did this to yourselves. We could have worked something out, Dani said, her voice breaking. If you just talked to me. Talked to you about what? About how you were stealing money with your boyfriend? About how you were planning to disappear to the Cayman Islands? About how you were going to leave me holding the bag for your federal crimes? She started crying, the same tears that had once made me want to comfort her. Now they just made me angry. I never meant for it to go this far. It started as just, I don't know, excitement, something different. Grant made me feel special. Special enough to commit federal crimes, special enough to destroy our marriage, special enough to throw away everything we built together. Grant stepped between us. This is very touching, but your wife made her own choices. She's an adult. She knew what she was doing. I looked at him, this man who'd seduced my wife and turned her into a criminal, and felt a calm satisfaction. You're right, Grant. She knew exactly what she was doing, just like you knew exactly what you were doing when you planned to abandon her and let her take the fall for your crimes. Both of them went quiet. Oh yes, I read all your messages. The real plan, not the fairy tale you sold Dani. You were going to disappear with the insurance money and leave her holding federal charges. She was never your partner. She was your patsy. Dani turned to Grant, her face white with shock. Is that true? Grant's silence was answer enough. You son of a bitch, she whispered. You were going to leave me. Business is business, Grant said. Someone had to take the fall, better you than me. That's when Dani attacked him. She flew at Grant with her fingernails, screaming about betrayal and lies and promises he'd never intended to keep. He tried to push her away, but she was beyond reason, clawing at his face and chest while courthouse security rushed to separate them. I stood back and watched my wife and her lover destroy what was left of their relationship in a hallway full of lawyers, reporters, and federal agents. The romance that had cost them everything ended in violence and mutual hatred. Security pulled them apart, both breathing hard, both disheveled. Grant's face was scratched, Dani's suit was torn, and their attorneys looked like they wanted to disappear. I hope you both get exactly what you deserve, I said. Then I walked away. 6 months later, the sentences were handed down. Grant got 15 years in federal prison and forfeiture of all assets. Dani got 8 years and lifetime probation, with restitution payments that would keep her in debt for the rest of her life. I kept the house, the cars, and the retirement accounts. I also kept my reputation, my career, and my self-respect. Most importantly, I kept the satisfaction of knowing that I'd beaten them both at their own game. They'd thought they were smarter than everyone else, that they could steal and cheat and betray without consequences. They were wrong. Justice isn't always swift, and it's not always perfect. But sometimes, if you're patient and smart and willing to do the work, it's exactly what everyone deserves. I never saw Dani again after the sentencing. I heard she was transferred to a federal facility in West Texas, where she'll have plenty of time to think about the choices that brought her there. Grant went to a minimum security prison in Colorado, where he's probably telling other inmates about the big deals he used to run and the women who betrayed him. They can tell themselves whatever stories help them sleep at night. I know the truth, they destroyed themselves, and I just made sure everyone else could see it happen. The mortgage business is built on trust, and trust once broken can never be fully repaired. Dani and Grant learned that lesson the hard way. As for me, I learned something too. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad or getting even. Sometimes the best revenge is simply making sure the truth comes to light.